Well, hey guys, we're back for another Beyond the Sermon, joined by my two friends, Pastor John and Pastor Zac. And we are continuing in the series about great stories. And we have quite the epic tale. Really God versus Baal, and Elijah somewhere there in the mix. And I guess Jezebel as well. But yeah, on the scale of epic stories you get to tell, where does this story fall for you guys? Do you like it? Does it feel weird? Does it,
I love this story.
Yeah,
It's one of my favorites.
Zac, you said at the beginning is like this. This is one of those dramatic, big moment stories. And the challenge of it, is, of course, is that it's a pretty intense story. There's the confrontation, but then there's the idolatry. Then there's the slaughter afterwards, which it's just it has a lot of intense moments to it. So and it's hard, it's easy for me who likes a good competition to kind of like, good guy, good guy wins. He takes on the bunch of the bad guys and wins, and you realize that, but this is a pretty substantial content that was behind this, and a pretty devastating outcome, at least for a group of 850 people.
Yeah, there was in some of the commentaries I read, it was interesting because they said for Elijah to kill 800, God had to have some part of that, because there's no way for one man to have taken that. Just, I mean, time wise, there's no way so God was part of the punishment too.
Yeah, when you read it, it's the call of Elijah is for the people to actually take out the Baal prophets, right? So like, to actually eliminate, and this is like one of those things that little details that you don't get to include, is like the very prophets that the people have been listening to. They're the ones that, because he actually uses the command phrase, seize those Baal prophets, right? So this one man who's been the troublemaker the whole time is now having to command the folks to create, to commit mass executions, which is an incredible way to look at it as well too.
Yeah. And it just kind of reminds me that there are very few prophets that have to do something that drastic. In my men's group in the summer, we were going over Moses' story, and I forgot that there are times where Moses too does that, but there's some of the few where they go, because of this, the Korah rebellion is mostly taken care of by God because of the earthquake. But prior to that, when they make the idol also to Baal, that you see this kind of play out too. So yeah, for our modern taste, or at least context, it's a hard thing to swallow, I think. But
there's a lot of people that don't like this story.
Yeah. Well, a lot of Old Testament stories in general. There's a lot of death in them. I won't lie. It's pretty overwhelming.
The whole book of Joshua.
Yeah. Yep. Well, on that note, I have a little bit of a stickler. It's not Baal, it's Baal, y'all. That's where you get to use your Southern twang in there. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes.
I don't know why that's a pet peeve, and I hate saying it.
I said it. I mean, I was like, it's Baal, because there is the little olive in there. But but people call it Baal. People say Baal, and that's what we're going to call it. So
and the fact of the matter is, there's not a single person alive who was there. I mean, we're guessing at the ancient we're guessing at ancient pronunciations all the time, and it's also just.
It's easier to say Baal for sure. I every time I say it, or like instead of Satan, it's Satan. People are like, "No, just stop that." Like, it's as close as we get to the proper way of saying this, but okay.
Carmel is the other one. Carmel.
Yes.
Carmel.
Well, yeah. No, that is the
Carmel is too close to caramel. So, and yeah.
True.
And plus the L at the end of a Hebrew word is always for Elohim. So you want to kind of put the emphasis on the L.
Yes. Yes.
For that reason.
Well, so Baal and Ashtaroth worship is happening in Israel. This is not the first time, and won't be the last time that those particular gods or entities show up. And it happens with Solomon. He erects through his wives many temples and high places, and all the things that come with them, which are either death oriented or sex oriented, one of the two. And although that's been cleansed, here we have it again. We have once more, Israel has allowed these two to, and kind of fun fact, Baal ends up being the same entity as Zeus, which is the same entity as, what is it, Pluto, I think in the Roman.
Jupiter.
Yes, you're right. Because Saturn would be right. So this same entity shows up quite a lot, and in particular seems to zone in on Israel. So Jesus has his own Zeus Baal showdown in the wilderness as well. But let's talk about, we've talked about this before, and there's just no way of getting around it, I think, biblically, which is the idea of syncretism, right? It's the idea of whether we want to call it religious or culture, which to me, it's hard to tell the difference between the two, is when we allow something to synchronize with our beliefs in God, or quite frankly, what he's told us to believe, what his commands are for us. And, like Solomon knew not to make temples and high places and altars to other gods. He knew that, and yet it happened. So I wanted us to talk, like, why does Israel keep doing it? And quite frankly, why does the modern church keep doing it? Why do we keep allowing ultimately culture to dictate or cultivate how we think or how we approach things? And why do we keep wandering? I mean, I know the obvious answer is sin, but what is it about humanity that just can't seem to get it in purifying ourselves? What do you guys think?
I think you need to do a little nuancing on distinction between syncretism and cultural accommodation. Just realizing that there's some things in the culture that are not in competition with the either the gospel itself or the presentation of the gospel, and then it's outright idolatry and outright worshiping false gods. Because with syncretism, you have one system of belief and you have another system of belief, and you actually end up creating a third thing, which is the blending of this one and the blending of that one to create something that is new. Maybe it has elements of these showing up, but it's no longer the one thing. It's no longer the other thing. It's just now this amalgamation of things. Cultural accommodation to me it would be like, what kind of things can we bring in? I think about the missionaries going to Asia, going into Africa, Latin America, places like that. And there are things in the culture there, musical styles, or the presence of dance and the body movement and with the bodies that you see, and that can be done without just taking away from the gospel. Can that be use that to actually enhance the gospel? And so there you are culturally, using what is in the culture to as a tool for the gospel. And then there's outright idolatry, which is like, no, it's not one thing, and then this, we're going to mix them together. It's just like, I'm not going to do my thing anymore. I'm just going after the new thing, and it's no longer my old thing at all. It's just a completely new thing. So I think I think what we see a lot of is, I think you could probably say we see all three of those things. There are plenty of times where what you're hearing is actually that's not the gospel has been tainted and affected by the thing that you have brought into this. It's kind of watered down. It's not even heard anymore as the reality of sin, the goodness of Jesus, and the commitment of a person's life. It's now something else. And so there's that. And then there's the, can you play drums in church, and can you use the screen in the church? And is that antithetical to the core of our message? And so those, I think it's a worthwhile distinction. And I think that what we were looking at in with Ahab and Ahab in particular is that he took on Baal and Asherah worship, and still tried to, because that was the challenge that Elijah put out there. Is like, all right, you can't do both.
Yeah.
We both said it. And Zach and I both said this. You can't do both, but he was. So he would have been truly synchronized. Synchronism.
Yeah, and I think I think that's probably the biggest challenge to the modern church is that and I hit it a little harder in the worship services that are live. It's this idea of I'm a it's we've talked a lot in the church over the last probably 5 or 10 years about the rise of the nuns, the people that admit no religion. And this is so terrible. This is so great. And one of the things that I've said many, many times is the polls are actually starting to reflect the reality that's been present for the last 40 years. It's just that for the last 40 years, up until the last 10 years, people were lying to themselves. They were like, I'm a Christian because I go to church on Christmas or I go to church on Easter. And so they didn't have any discernible, their religion was cultural, and because the culture went to church, they went to church, and so they called themselves Christians. And so this is but their lives were reflecting more of a worldview that was dominated by John, one of the things you did just so clearly was actually line up all these categories of potential idols, consumerism, materialism, all these different things, family relationships and whatever. Those were always the idols of the so-called nuns today, but they just called themselves Christians, but allowed themselves to worship those idols, except on Christmas or maybe Easter. And I think you asked the question why. So you get down to like this rationality point. I think a lot of it has to do with popularity and persuasion, right? I mean, why is it that Adam and Eve ultimately bow down to the idol of self-improvement? Because that's really what the serpent is offering, self-improvement. You can become like God, knowing good and evil, and the trifold temptation that Eve that Moses articulates with Eve is that it's good for food. It was good to the eye. It was good for food. It was useful to make one wise. I mean, so there's this persuasive element to it, and then as you kind of go down the line of redemptive history, it's the popularity of the whatever the religious artifact is. It's why Aaron throws the gold into the fire and poof, out pops this golden calf. It's like the people made me do it. It's this.
I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, it's yeah, that story always reminds me of like a 5-year-old. I don't know. But I think that's it. It's the persuasive element of improvement and the popularity. And I think some of it has to do with faith in our God is inherently intangible. I mean, one of the 10 commandments is you shall not make for yourself an idol. Whereas the gods of Canaan, the gods of Egypt, the gods of the Amorites and the Hittites and the Jebusites, they said, yeah, make yourself an idol. Have something to touch, have something to feel, have something to hold on to. So there's that tangibility factor too. It's like, so there's almost like you trick yourself into convincing or to believing that because you can feel it, it's somehow more real, even though they have a long history of seeing God's presence. So I don't know. I think that's the reason people fall into idolatry or sinful cultural accommodation as opposed to, John was outlining more righteous cultural accommodation, because I do think that happens as well too. And syncretism as well.
Yeah, that's good.
I think you're wise, Josh, that you said earlier. You just said, almost as a passing statement, other than the obvious answer of sin, but the reality is the obvious answer of sin is at its heart, because we are prone to self-interest. seeking self-interest. Now, one of the distinctions in the whole uh, movement that became known as the Reformation, it started out in a anthropocentric moment where Martin Luther was saying, "Where can I find relief from my sense of guilt before a God who I see as righteous and holy and holy other?" I am feeling weighed down by that. And then by the time you get to John Calvin, he's saying, "Who is this God?" And let's be theocentric first and foremost, and let's explain the nature of God. And I think at our worst, we are chronically anthropocentric. It is all about a self-interest and what we are up to. But and at our best, we are doing the things that Zac and I both called for on this Sunday's sermon, which is we are seeking the life of God first and the interest of God first. And I think that's why you bring in these other elements, because these are the things that are going to they're interesting to me, or I think they're going to give me satisfaction. They're going to give me pleasure. So I'm going to integrate them into my own sort of make your DIY spirituality. So I'm going to make my own version of what feels spiritually right. But it's
Yeah.
all about me. So the point is, we're all about me.
Good distinctions there. Yeah, and the first commandment is have no other gods before me, which is acknowledging that these fallen entities are real. And so Baal maybe was using the restroom. He was around in a sense, but I think God had silenced him. And so that's the other hard part is when you look at Egypt's their prophets versus Moses, they did real miracles. The question is, where did they get that power from? Well, they're God, so to speak. They're fallen entity. And so I think the other interesting thing is I actually think some of these fallen entities give more tangible things and to rope you in, sort of like the worm and the hook, so to speak. A lot of my friends who have come from like Wiccan practices or even like druidic sort of background, they would say, well, the thing that snagged me was I would interact and an entity would talk to me and it would give me powers and so forth. Whereas God, I'd feel like I'd call out to him and there was nothing there. And so that's, I know it's hard in our modern thinking to kind of frame our heads around that there are other things out there that want to destroy us and bring us in. And I think they tempted Israel, and I think they tempt the modern church too. So it's not just the flesh; it's Satan, him, maybe not him personally, but the systems and sometimes him. Okay, now John, you did list like our common idols in a sense. I want to go a little bit deeper with the question. I think even the most, I think most of us could say like we know that over entertaining ourselves is certainly a distraction, but what's the deeper things that the thing about syncretism is when you go apostate, so to speak, or just never, obviously we're never in the faith or whatever, you're just trading one God, so to speak, for another. That's obvious. So if you were to corner somebody with syncretism in their lives, they would go, well, no, 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 I don't believe in Satan, or like I'm not on his team, or I believe in God, I believe in Jesus. But if you're to look at their actions and the way they live their lives, there's something more subtle creeping in there. Does that make sense? And so I wanted to hone in on like what are those balls, if you will, like in our culture that can actually convince us that I am team Jesus or I am this thing. You mentioned it earlier, Zac, where it's like, well, no, no, I'm not opposed to him. I'm very much, but then nothing matches with that, or something's really wrong there. You guys get what I'm saying? It's a subtler. Whereas if I just go like I'm a Luciferian, well, then you know where I, you know where I stand. I stand on that. Whereas this one's a little syncretism is a little bit harder because it you still are convinced you're doing something you're actually not doing, if that makes sense. Um, yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I tried to hit in the message this week was, and again, this is like live sermon was a little bit clearer, I think, than the pre-recorded. Is that there are a lot of good things that we pursue pretty substantially that become idols when we make them ultimate things. Like I mentioned things like volunteerism and good citizenship and raising your. I mean, John, you mentioned family relationships in there. Those are all good things that are godly things, but they turn evil when they become ultimate. And this is the part where it's the wolf in sheep's clothing, like things that we would promote as healthy things, even as Christians, can quickly take us away from the devotion that is owed to God, because it's like, well, no, I can't spend time actually, and I've seen this, I've even heard this from people. Like, I can't spend time in devotional reading and prayer because I'm too busy out feeding the homeless, Um, and again, good godly thing, go feed the homeless, Micah 6:8, like love mercy for sure. But the difference between, you know, godly mercy, Christian charity, and just, civic charity is where's the motivation seated? If the motivation isn't seated out of gratitude for the generous nature of Jesus Christ, then the good thing becomes an idol, and I mean, I'll tell you this, like, I think in our community, in this community specifically, I'm talking about the Lakeland community, the balance between civic involvement and church and Christian witness in the community gets real tricky, because civic involvement is a real high priority in Lakeland, and that's a good thing. It's why Lakeland is such a strong city. But even those amongst the faithful, I think, struggle with making civic involvement idolatry, and then it turns into the things that are more obviously idolatry, like recognition and civic awards, and you do see what I'm saying? Like, it becomes like the frog in the boiling pot. Good thing, feels nice, and then next thing you've fallen into that trap.
Gosh, I don't know how you have a different answer than the answer to the first one. The how did it happen in the first place, and how does it happen in modern America? I don't know how if you have a different answer, because what I hear Zach saying, I completely agree with, is that anytime you take something that is good and then just make it ultimate in any way, it becomes the very thing we were talking about earlier. It becomes this. Um, it becomes the center, and it becomes something that is self-satisfying, and it becomes all about us and our pleasures, or our sense of worth, or our sense of identity, and that's all rooted in the in our brokenness and our sinfulness. And so it really is the how does it happen? How does the church today keep doing this? Is because the church is full of people like me. I mean, we're broken, and the only thing the good the good thing to say in response to that is that yeah, but throughout the Old Testament and stories, just like we told on Sunday, and throughout the New Testament, certainly the call is to live otherwise. The call is to frame it. I love the motivation conversation, Zach, because the call is to be self-reflective and introspective enough to know what really is driving that, and can I see my own tainted sin tainted motivation in that, and can I begin to say, oh, what would it look like to live differently? So I'm not sure how to answer the question that you're asking, Josh, other than to reframe it as some variation of the sin nature that is in us, that has the tainted motivations, and yet we are striving and hearing these stories, and hearing the call of the gospel to live otherwise.
Yeah,
Well,
I'll give you
can I just say too? I think trying to find people who have lived otherwise, or who have done it better than most, I think is such an important step in that process. Um, Folks who have taken the good things and not made them ultimate things. Um, that's such an important kind of methodology to keep, because I think the follow-up question is, yeah, I get this, but how? Like, how do I do this? Like, how do I keep myself from making good things ultimate things? How do I keep myself from making the things that are culturally reinforced and popular amongst my peers, and that yield some positive results? How do I make that? How do I continue to do those things? How do I continue to be a good parent without making my kids the idol? You know, how do I continue to be a good citizen of my community without making civic involvement an idol? Because I do think it's easier to say, I would say it's easier because like it's more obvious to say like, hey, materialism can really be an idol, so I ought to not buy as much, right? Like I ought not to do that. Like, and you know, good for me, my bank account's a little more, you know, little spongier than it was before, and maybe I can use those for good and charitable things. It's a tougher part is to say, how do I make things that are obviously good things not ultimate things so that they become evil and bad?
Yeah, yes, it's very subtle. I would a couple things jump out to me. Good question, John. Good pushback on that. I think one of them is we can't assume people enter the faith neutral. People enter the faith indoctrinated. It is what our culture does by nature. Now, I am not saying culture is evil in every way, but it means that in order to come to Christ, I must transform my mind aligned by his word. Well, that's predicated on that I did that, or the Holy Spirit is doing that because I'm practicing that and I'm reading my Bible. So if I'm not reading my Bible, there's nothing to really anchor me. And two, if I don't want to transform my mind, I'm going to assume what things do I like from God's word that make me feel good? And then what things do I not like from God's word? And I'll just kind of retcon or find some good argument of why that shouldn't apply to nowadays. And that was this thing and a that thing. And so we see that rampantly in Israel and in the modern church. And so I think to me, the Baals are the more creeping ways in that goes, hey, God probably didn't really mean that. What he meant was you can be a little loosey goosey on that one and also this one. And you know what? Now that we're thinking about it, does that one even make sense? Right. And so it becomes this cascading result of next thing I know, I'm barely doing anything in Christ. Whereas to Zach's point, I think it would be much easier to go like, I probably shouldn't take crack cocaine. Like that just seems like a bad overall thing. It's kind of more obvious. It's the devil with the pitchfork. Does that make sense? Whereas these other ones, I think, and I think
It's the
that's a
wolf in
great,
sheep's clothing, right?
yeah.
It's the creeping in the bushes, right? It's
But
the
Zach,
sneaky.
man, it's also if I don't know, what's C.S. Lewis's quote? If I'm playing with mud and sticks, that's the best thing I know. But not knowing that the ocean's like right around over the mountain, right? Like I don't even know there's a better version unless I see the better version or I have somebody live it out around me. And so I do think that's the hard part is there even someone like, so we say you can make family your idol. Well, what does it even look like to not make your family idol? If every friend you have is doing the same exact things you're doing as a Christian, then to your point, it becomes like, oh, I thought I was doing the Christian thing. Does that make sense? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard and it's really subtle. And
I do think it keeps coming back to a person's ability to be self-reflective, introspective. I mean, I think and I love how it was Haddon Robinson who once said that thinking is tough. That's what he said. He said, thinking is tough, but he said thinking about thinking is even tougher.
well,
So
well said.
you gotta think about the way you think about. You know, you gotta think about the way that you think about money, material, and pleasure, and all these. You gotta think about how you think about things like that. I find that very helpful. But if I could just summarize it in a couple of words, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard work. Which is why we have a what Dallas Willard called it. We have a world that has gotten quite comfortable with bumper sticker theology.
Yeah.
Just summarize it, catchy little phrases that have real no depth of self-reflection in it, and yet they capture something. And it's not I mean, it's not enough to counteract the cultural weight of the influence of the norms of culture. And the norms of culture say that you should be about, constantly acquiring more. You should be about pleasure, all that you can get. You should be about all these things. So I think it comes down to being self-reflective, and that's hard work.
Yeah. And
Well, and isn't that,
shameless
and
plug here,
isn't that,
why you need to be in a community group, right? Because if you're around
Yes,
other
it
people,
is.
you're having those conversations. And yeah, sorry, Zach, I
well,
cut you off.
and it's no, but it's we don't want to really look at ourselves, and by that I mean look at the indicators, right? Like there are indicators, and I mean, you talk about this all the time. Like we don't want to look at the indicators that reveal the idolatry of our hearts. And there are there are three key indicators that will reveal the idolatry of your heart. It's your your calendar and your bank account and your energy level. Like, and where you, when you get to the end of the day, say, where did my energy go today? And that's not to say that if it wasn't spent, well, I didn't spend my energy in praise and worship, and hymnody and Bible reading, like that you were automatically an idolater. But it's like, if the things that you're doing, you're not submitting to the lordship of Christ, and doing the hard thing, like even the parenting thing, which is obviously near and dear to my heart. There are countercultural decisions you have to make as a parent if you're doing it
Yeah.
to the glory of God. There's just it, and that's, and I I'm gonna say I got some flack for it, but when I said what I said, and I don't know if it was in the live version only or recording because it all kind of blends together. When I said, "Is your kid's batting average going to be there for you when when the cancer diagnosis comes, when the trauma comes, when the loss comes? Is that going to sustain them? Is their report card?" And that's the one that really hits close to home because my kids didn't play baseball, but we do put a high emphasis on education. But like, is the report card going to sustain them when their world falls apart, when your world falls apart? And when I said that in the 10:30 service, man, it was like pin drops, because they're I know that there are people in that room that, like me, struggle with holding your kids up to a performance level metric that can very easily be idolatrous, and where you have to, as a parent, make a decision to say, nope, I'm not gonna so overly emphasize the performance in sports or school or whatever that we don't spend time as a family developing our faith. We don't spend time as a family having spiritual conversations because we're too busy transporting, and that's just one example where good thing becomes idol, and you have to check it. You have to like do the gut check, soul work, and really look at the calendar, look at the finances, look at the energy, and say, okay, did I do this today to the glory of God, or did I do it in service to cultural norms?
Yeah. And then another layer to that is the Holy Spirit might have your family in particular do something very different than the families next to you, even that are in sync with Christ, right? Like some of our families here that come during the summer are missionaries, right? Like, so God has specifically placed a call. We're all to be missionaries, but to be missionaries in a foreign field, so to speak. So it's not that I just get to look at the people around me and make a judgment off of other Christians. It's that I have to have an actual conversation and walk with Jesus to go, you might be calling me to do something so specific that even my Christian friends might go, oh, I don't know, like, is that a good move for your career? Is that a good, what about your kids? Because Zach, to your point, that's some of the flack that we hear from Christians is you can hear almost their idols come out, so to speak, when somebody goes, I'm going to do something that we feel like the Holy Spirit is calling us to do. And it's going to sound kind of crazy to the people around us. And all of a sudden you see this shaking of the paradigm that comes from that. But we'll quickly kind of go through this one. what does the story really teach us about God's view of divided devotion? Like, what does this reveal of his character in y'all's opinion?
He's not a fan. He's not a
Yeah.
fan.
Not a fan.
Not a
Yeah.
fan. Not a fan.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
God for grace and mercy.
Yeah.
And slow to anger.
But
Thank for that.
I will say this though. I do, one of the things I love about the story is that there is a moment, even though the moment it kind of gets crowded out with all the drama of the moment, but there's a moment in the middle of this story where he has this, and I think I mentioned it, the Joshua 24 type of moment where there's all kinds of choices out there, folks. There's lots of spiritual choices out there, but be declarative, like say it, declare it to be so. And I'm not like, you choose this day whom you will serve is the one out of Joshua. And if God is God, follow him. If Baal's Baal, God, follow Baal. In this story, I think that is, and this may lean into the third part of the second part of what we'll do here, which is to say what kind of things to do we talk about in our small groups here. But I think there's value to saying, in a as an individual, as a couple, those who are married, as a family, to be able to say this. We're going to say it out loud. This is our priority.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, Josh, I don't know if you've taken Greek yet, but Zach and I, we've taken Greek and Hebrew. Is like, we said when we were taking those of us who are taking Greek in seminary was like, if we don't commit that we're going to have some ongoing facility with the Greek language beyond seminary, we will lose this almost in its entirety here. So we are going to just make a statement. We're going to have some facility with it. So we're going to commit to learning this beyond, staying with this beyond seminary. I think it's a similar moment as an individual, as a couple, as a family, saying, look, let's be really clear. This is our first priority. This is a central part of our life. And I fear that if that doesn't get said in that kind of declarative way, then it'll just all of our priorities, all of our internal motivation will just be gobbled up by all of the noise and the other alternatives all around us.
Preach, John. I'm loving it. You're nailing it. I'm like,
and then making sure that the declaration is supported by action.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I could tell you firsthand, like making the declaration gives your kids the opportunity to hold you accountable. I'm thinking about home context, to say, like, as the kids get older, it's awesome when Wyatt will start to correct you, Josh, for for your spiritual shortcomings, because it's a kick in the teeth when they do it, but it's because they if they take you at your word, which is what you hope, which is what you hope you will do for yourself. But we know we are internally divided people. God's not thrilled with that. It's not a fan of that. And thankfully, our kids are truth tellers, hopefully, where if you made that declarative statement like John's talking about, and you're not backing it up, like my kids have called me out a couple times when I've been behind the wheel of a vehicle and a dude decides to cut me off, right?
That's good.
And because we aren't going to always back it up the way we should.
Yeah.
But making that declarative statement and then doing your best to live it out by the power of the Holy Spirit. When you don't, there's an opportunity to have the corrective moment,
Yeah. That's good. Well, second shameless plug, we're going to have a marriage conference in October 4th where we'll actually be talking about some of these declaratives and what it means to have a mission as a couple, as a family. And to your point, both you, John, and Zach, what it not only means to declare it, so get it out there, right? Speak it, but then to follow through on it. And what does it mean to create margin around that and actually do the hard work? So, well, guys, we're going to
do that over the course of the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just like I've got this season of my life where my kids are in elementary school. It's when your kids are 45 years old, 60-year-old kids, you're still living it out.
Yeah.
And explain to them.
Living.
Yeah, and explain to them when they don't like when you do have to make hard decisions, like not signing them up for every activity under the sun, because you want to have margin to make sure that their groups, their small groups and their church groups and their church attendance and their community is a priority. So we're not going to, when you make those kinds of statements, then you have something to go back to give them like the rationale when you have to say, no, we're not doing that. We're taking breaks, it gives you that tool as well.
Amen. All right, we're going to take a short break here, and we will be back with our small group and grow group questions. All right, guys, we are back with our small group, grow group questions, because as of this recording, those kick back off. Well, some of them are evergreen. They're always going, but a large amount of them are kicking off tomorrow, Wednesday night. So, gentlemen, who wants to jump in? What are some questions you would lead with?
I'd ask your questions. What are the Baals and Asherahs of today? What are the things that we bring in from other places and try to bring them into our faith, or incorporate them into our faith, or just the things that we go after that become ultimate for us, and spend some time as a group, as individuals, or maybe you get on the board or whatever and just write down what specifically are those things that do draw us in.
That's good.
And I think too, like, how do we know when the good things have become ultimate things? Because it is a slow, it is an imperceptible shift, I think, when it tips from this is a good godly thing to it's an idol. I think how do you know when that line has been crossed? And I think in your group, if you can think of a moment when that's actually taken place, when the good and godly thing, you see it, and you're like, one day you're like, oh my gosh, this has become an idol. This has become so much a part of who I am. And I think, John, you talked about it from an identity standpoint, which I obviously love that. But I think, when is it that those things become so ingrained with my identity that if I remove them, I don't know who I am? I don't, we hear that a lot with people that retire from their jobs. Like, I don't know who I am if I'm not a fill in the blank, how do those things shift, and what's that line? I think that's a good discussion to have with people, and in the groups, like, maybe bat around some things that you're not sure about, like that you're feeling the creep, but like you want to make a correction, but you're not really sure, is it there yet? So you want to make the correction before it gets there, because it is, I think they're like in the story, it wasn't like it was like boom boom. It was they entered the land, God told them not to do it, and then this slow creep, they started to worship at the high places. They started to, start to take on some of the trappings of idol worship, and then it became all of who they are. So, like, talk through that, I think, with the group is powerful.
That's good.
Maybe add a little starting point for that. What good things have become ultimate for us is, maybe ask the question about, what is God's perspective on work, which can be ultimate for many people, and achievement and success. And what is God's perspective on family and relationships? Because I think it'll be helpful to hear, maybe just talk out, what stories reinforce what we see as God's perspective, what biblical stories reinforce what we see as God's perspective on work, on pleasure, on identity, on even our connection to the material world, and our acquisition of things to use in this material world. Of course, we're going to say that God is not against any of these things. It's not like he's declaring any of these things to be evil. It's just, I think it'd be an interesting exercise to say, well, what exactly is God's perspective on work and pleasure and family and all these things? And it's not against it, but how would you describe it? And then that may actually help us get to the point of saying, okay, this is where it then crosses the line between being something that is intended to be, that is declared good, and where it's not, it's not good.
Man, that's good.
And I would, one thing that we haven't talked about in this story, but I think it would be an interesting discussion in the small group as it relates to something personal is, this is a very dramatic scene. This was not God saying to the people, "Hey guys, could you kind of calm down on the whole worship of these false gods?" I mean, this was dramatic. This was 3 years of total like drought, followed by fire from heaven in front of the entire nation. And so I would ask the question like, what would be the drought? What would be the fire from heaven that God's gonna need to use in order for you to kind of rip out the idol in your life? Like, where does God need to show up that dramatically because you're so um addicted to success, addicted to your job, addicted to, I mean, I use the term addicted on purpose because that's what the people in Israel were. I mean, they were absolutely addicted to that idol worship for all of the popular, motivations that we talked about before, and so it was only going to be a dramatic display, that caused that. And maybe there's a story in the group where that has happened, and it was painful. I have a story myself where that took place, where in my college years, God had to literally rip something from my life in order to get my attention that it had become an idol. And how did that turn out? How did that turn out? If someone has a story like that, and if you don't, is there a space where you're like, I don't really want God to do this, but this is the only way I'm going to change?
Yeah. I would ask, like, idols are sin. These are a big deal. These are a really big deal. And so, how, maybe one of the questions is, how have we gotten so callous to that we are working against a holy God and working against really the vows that we've made to him? On one hand, we're not perfect, but see, we even say that, right? We say that as like to lessen the sting. And it's like, well, yes, we're not perfect. Yet should we not strive to be holy and righteous? And so somewhere in our modern day, we've made even idols sound like kind of almost a joke in some way. Like, well, they're not that bad. Or we have a tendency to say, well, the idol of career is not maybe say as bad as this other idol over here. And it's like, no, no, no. All idols are idols, and they're all sin, and they all bring death every time. So career addiction is death for you, your energy, your family, right? You're now teaching another generation how to bring death into their life and pursue death. And so it's like I'm trying to not be fundamental on one hand to go like, well, no, there's a lot of grace and slow anger. Thank God for that. but on the other hand, we can't lighten what this is and the repercussions of what this is. And I do think that's what leads to syncretism is it's not that big a deal, and that begins to creep. So why isn't, if somebody was to call out, let's say your career pursuing or the grades for your kids, why doesn't that sting? Why doesn't something inside of you go, I can't allow my kids to be consumed by this? What is it that's missing in me that I've been seared from, in a sense? The other thing might be, um, how do I, like, let's say a promotion's coming and I'm already maxed out, but let's say a promotion's coming, it's a big giant pay gap. How do I start asking the question, is this what God wants, and how does this help his kingdom, versus is this good for me or my family? Like, I got to take me out of that seat, and I got to take really maybe the idol, which is my family, out of the seat and go, you know, what if I make more money and I'm not as reliant on God anymore? Because I don't need God, right? And so how do I start to ask the harder questions on a more broken down level of, um, do I even know what sin is? Do I even know what the idols are in my life? And then how do I actually make sure new ones don't get introduced into my life? And I think part of that is the ongoing conversation with your spouse, if you have one, or your friends, or your community group, to go, hey guys, I'm not sure which one this is. Is this just like a good opportunity and God's given me freedom? or is this just me chasing another thing, another item to put on my mantle and ultimately lay claim on me and bring destruction in my life. So, any last thoughts?
And I think too,
yeah.
But I think I would love to have a conversation with you, explore in a group the relationship of fear to the motivation of sin, and especially as it is dictated by the worship of idols. Because I think even in that example you gave, which is a very very practical kind of real world example, like, is the motivation fear that God's not going to provide, or is it motivation that I need to provide for myself? Because you think about like the story with Elijah. I mean, he even says it, like, all the other prophets are dead, like he's it. Like, it's not, and they didn't die, of boredom. They died because King Ahab and Jezebel went after him, and Jezebel continues to hound Elijah even after this story. I mean, John, you alluded to it. We talked about it at length last fall in our Disquiet series. Like, Elijah can't catch a break because Jezebel has such murderous intention, and the people, I wonder how many of them, like, they follow the gods of Jezebel and King Ahab, not because they believe like it's actually going to work or they're actually real gods, but out of fear. And so much of even like the performance that our kids kind of live into with grades or whatever, I'm afraid that they're not going to make a good living or get a good job or have it's like, how much of that is motivated by fear, and as a result, a lack of trust in the goodness and the provision of our God. And so we trust an idol that's not going to show up, but we think it's going to show up. So I think it'd be an interesting conversation in groups to talk about, what am I afraid of that's causing me to make this thing ultimate. And not all of them are like that, but I think a lot of them are.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of the things I had on the list of possible things to suggest of what these idols could be was just the idol of security, and where we find our source of security, and usually there's fear behind that. So if I feel that God's maybe not going to take care of my future, so therefore I'm going to just really dig down on what I'm going to do it myself, and God's going to be apart from God. I'd have a couple of declarative ones to maybe to finish up maybe a group time with. One of them is just back to what you were saying, Josh. Just declaring whether these things, as they have been lived out in maybe our individual life, a couple life, family life, whether these things are benign, that they're you receive them for the good things that they are, and they're not causing you any spiritual harm, or whether they're malignant. Just to just name them, name the thing. Is the thing okay, or has it become a problem? Just again going back to a naming, and I think it'd be a really interesting group time is to have in essence a covenant renewal as a group. Choose this day whom you shall serve.
Yeah.
As for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. Follow God or follow Baal. We pick a lane, people. Don't straddle the fence. That'd be just to say, yep, we're going to declare it. We're going to say it out loud. If we've never said it before, we're saying it out loud today.